Ahead of the review for Cyberpunk 2077's first and only expansion, Liberty City, this reviewer felt that it was necessary to focus solely on Cyberpunk's 2.0 update. This isn't a patch as much as it is a complete overhaul of the game. There are a lot of changes, please excuse me if some are not mentioned, although this in itself is not an entirely bad thing, as this reviewer tends to try and avoid spoiling experiences for players who are new to the games that he covers. Of course, any video or review on any game is by its very nature a spoiler already. Before the release of 2.0, this reviewer had already played the entire game 5 times. Cyberpunk 2077 has become one of a small number of games that this player has experienced and would want to return to play again. Those games already being reviewed on this channel, such as Fallout 4 and the Mass Effect series. In fact, this player was already playing through his 6th playthrough when 2.0 launched, and this has afforded a more accurate comparison. Above everything else, the single most important change is the stability of the game. Having played the game from the beginning, yes, the 7th playthrough, since the update, the game has not crashed once. Bear in mind that in every other playthrough prior to the update, the game would have hard crashed at least 2 or 3 times. The way in which this player approached this was that as soon as the open world is available to you, he went out and started completing all of the NCPD quests, cyberpsychosis quests, side quests and gigs, while simultaneously exploring every nook and cranny of the map. The aim was to see if the stability held throughout the world. Although this reviewer was certainly not part of the development process for Cyberpunk 2077 and is also not acquainted with recent developments in game design production, he can hazard a guess as to how the team have created this stability. There are noticeably far less interactive assets in the game, so without attempting to patronize, here is an explanation. Every virtual object in a game, whether a building, a car, a tree, a leaflet, a cup, a weapon, etc., can be referred to as an asset. There are broadly speaking 2 types of assets: static, assets that are fixed in a location and don't move, such as a building, and interactive or dynamic assets such as cups, weapons, etc., anything that a player can interact with. Note that a static asset can have dynamic assets associated with it. For example, a building can have doors and windows, etc. Dynamic assets call for much greater amounts of memory from the game engine and consequently the platform you are running the game on than static. The computer system has to keep track of their location, what possible effects they can have on the game or the player character, and also note when an asset is no longer in the game world. Before 2.0, there were huge amounts of dynamic assets such as coffee cups, leaflets, objects within suitcases and crates, etc. There were in fact way too many, and this was causing the game engine to crash unexpectedly, often while preloading in a new area that a player would be travelling to. It is immediately evident that there are far fewer collectible objects in the world. This reduction in assets also flows into large changes linked with crafting and character development throughout the leveling process. Before 2.0, Cyberpunk followed a more traditional role-playing game leveling process with respect to weapons and armour, with crafting playing an important role in creating the best weapons, armour and accessories in the game. Before 2.0, if you were replaying the game, it was highly likely that you would already have the knowledge to gain the best items for your character fairly early on in the leveling process. Though some of this is still feasible, gaining power is much more in line with the leveling up process now, and a major reason for that is the emphasis on cyberware. Cyberware for your character has now become more important than the best weapons and accessories. For one thing, armour is very much dependent on the implants that you have. The whole cyberware system has been revamped with more options and ideas, and cyberware itself has a leveling up process that requires components, exactly the same idea that was used in crafting beforehand. These levels are referred to as tiers. Although in both cyberware leveling up and weapon updating You now only need one specific resource, which changes relative to the tier you are attempting to obtain. As was noted above, resources are more scarce. This then slows down your ability to gain higher tiers too quickly. In addition, buying good cyberware as opposed to leveling it up can be very expensive. It is possible to gain some skill boosts and armor on some clothing, but most clothing is now just cosmetic. You can craft items and weapons pretty much from the get-go, and pretty much all of the skills associated with crafting no longer exist. This does take a little getting used to initially, but most players will probably come to the conclusion that the new systems are better. All of the perks associated with attributes have been changed, and there are some really exciting possibilities for players to experiment with. Perhaps one of the most notable changes is with player movement. Players can now dash, which is a very fast lunge in any direction over a few meters. This can be enhanced with a mid-air dash, which when combined with the ability to double jump or jump higher, completely changes gameplay. This player uses an assault rifle, and with this new movement was able to effortlessly reposition, outflanking, retreating and charging effortlessly. It reminded this reviewer of Titanfall 2, although not as extensive. It does emulate that speed and ability to traverse around combat with ease. The reduction in assets and the increased stability has also resulted in higher and more stable frame rates, resulting in the game actually looking better at times than before. Very rarely the frame rate does drop within very built-up fixed asset mesh areas. This player found that a quick save, exit game, open game, load, fix that issue every time. There are still, very rarely, a few quirky things going on in Night City. For example, this reviewer couldn't decide whether or not this was either erotic or horrific. Certain vehicles are now able to have weaponry, for example my beloved Javelina. It also seems that vehicle handling has been reworked, and there is now a new vehicle view that is further and higher from the vehicle than before, more in line with games such as Grand Theft Auto 5, which makes it easier to control the vehicle and see everything else going on. The roads themselves have also been fixed. You will no longer have your car hit a joint in road sections and either stop dead or flip. Events are things that happen in the game world, either via the player character or independently of them. Events where groups of NPCs are causing trouble in the game world, for example gangs in alleyways or holding up kiosks, have been reworked, with some being removed and replaced with the introduction of highly wanted criminals. The voice of Mr. Hands in Pacifica has changed. Whether or not this has anything to do with the expansion, this reviewer cannot state at the moment. Perhaps something for the review. In the original review of Cyberpunk 2077 on this channel, it was stated that Cyberpunk had all the trappings of a masterpiece, but without the necessary exacting refinement. This is now no longer the case, for despite there still being the odd quirky thing happening and very rare frame rate slowdown, it cannot be overstated enough how important 2.0 has been to the overall quality of the game. It is almost like playing a completely different game and is a galaxy away from the disastrous launch version. Cyberpunk 2077 is now one of the greatest games of this or any other generation. Kudos, CD Projekt Red. Kudos.